Hello everyone, this is Mr.VinzTales. Tonight, I'll be sharing an hour and a half of bedtime stories to help you drift off to sleep. Before we begin, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on my future tales. Now let's dive into our first story, Princess Lyra's Journey. The sun set over the golden spires of Eldoria, painting the skies with hues of crimson and violet. From the tallest tower of the royal palace, Princess Lyra gazed out across the bustling city below. The streets were alive with the preparations for the Midwinter Festival, an event meant to bring joy and unity to the kingdom. Yet, beneath the surface of the celebration, whispers of unease had begun to spread. Lyra turned away from the window, her silk gown swishing softly against the polished marble floor. Though she wore the crown of a princess, she felt more like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. Her father, King Alden, was a good man, wise and just, but he had always shielded her from the harsh realities of ruling. "Lyra, you must understand," he had said to her just that morning in the throne room. "The burden of the crown is not one you can bear lightly. There are truths you are not yet ready to face." She had nodded obediently, but his words only deepened her curiosity. That night, as the palace buzzed with the festival's eve preparations, Lyra slipped into the royal archives. Her heart raced as she traced her fingers over the spines of ancient tomes, searching for answers to the rumors she had overheard. One name kept resurfacing in the fragments of old texts: the Whispering Crown, a relic of immense power, said to be both a blessing and a curse. Lyra found a worn scroll containing a prophecy. When the crown whispers again, a royal heart will choose the fate of the realm. The path of unity or the path of ruin shall be forged by their hand. The scroll also bore a crude map. Though faded, it seemed to mark the location of an ancient ruin deep within the Whispering Woods. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as if unseen eyes were watching her. The next morning, Lyra approached her father, feigning casual interest. "Father," she began hesitantly, "why do the archives speak of the Whispering Crown? Is it a fairy tale or does it hold some truth?" King Alden's face darkened. "It is not a tale for you to concern yourself with, Lyra. The crown is a relic of the past, one that brought only misery to our ancestors. Forget what you have read." But Lyra could not forget. That night, with her trusted handmaiden Celine by her side, she made the decision to leave the palace. She donned a simple cloak and packed the map, a dagger, and a locket given to her by her late mother. Celine, ever loyal, whispered as they slipped through a hidden passage, "Princess, are you sure about this? The Whispering Woods are said to be cursed." Lyra nodded firmly. "I cannot live in ignorance, Celine. If the prophecy is true, then it is my duty to uncover the truth." The Whispering Woods lay several days' journey from Eldoria. To navigate the treacherous lands, Lyra and Celine sought the help of a guide. In the shadowy corners of a bustling marketplace, they encountered Kyle, a rogue with a charming grin and a reputation for bending the law. "You want to go there?" Kyle laughed when Lyra showed him the map. "Either you're braver than you look, princess, or far more foolish." "How did you know?" Lyra began, but Kyle interrupted with a smirk. "The cloak doesn't hide the way you carry yourself. Royalty is written all over you." After some negotiation and a hefty pouch of gold, Kyle agreed to lead them. But as they traveled, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle had motives of his own. The Whispering Woods lived up to its name. The ancient trees loomed tall, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. Every breeze carried faint whispers, as if the forest itself were alive. "Stay close," Kyle warned, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The woods don't take kindly to outsiders." As they ventured deeper, they encountered strange phenomena, glowing mushrooms that pulsed like beating hearts, shadows that moved without cause, and paths that seemed to shift when unobserved. Lyra felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her every step. One night, as they camped beneath the boughs of an ancient oak, Lyra dreamed of the crown. It whispered to her in a language she couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. Find me. When she awoke, she found herself clutching the map more tightly than ever. In the heart of the forest, the group encountered a griffin, a majestic creature with golden feathers and piercing eyes. It regarded Lyra with a knowing gaze. "You seek the Whispering Crown," it said, its voice resonant and ancient. Lyra hesitated before nodding. "Do you know where it lies?" The griffin studied her for a long moment. "The crown is both salvation and destruction. It will test your heart, princess. Be wary, for its whispers can deceive even the purest of souls." It provided them with a riddle, a cryptic clue to the crown's resting place. Lyra realized that her journey was not merely one of discovery, but of understanding her own strength and resolve. As they neared the ruins marked on the map, the group was ambushed by assassins from the Shadow Court. Lady Morgana, their leader, confronted Lyra. "You tread dangerous ground, child," Morgana sneered. "The crown's power is not yours to claim." Lyra stood her ground. "I do not seek power, I seek the truth." Morgana's laughter echoed through the forest. "The truth? Then hear this. Your bloodline is cursed, princess. The crown will destroy you as it did your ancestors. Leave now, or face the same fate." But Lyra refused to turn back. The map led Lyra, Kael, and Selene to the outskirts of the Whispering Woods, where the ruins of Ilarion stood. Once a thriving city of magic and knowledge, it had been reduced to rubble centuries ago, its collapse shrouded in mystery. Vines covered crumbling stone walls, and the air felt heavy, charged with latent magic. Kael surveyed the ruins warily. "If the crown is anywhere, it's here, but something about this place feels wrong." The group found an ancient mosaic in the center of the ruins, depicting a crown surrounded by a blazing sun and a shadowy crescent moon. In the language of the Old Kingdom, an inscription read, "To claim the crown, one must endure the trials of truth, courage, and sacrifice." The mosaic shifted as Lyra approached, revealing a hidden staircase leading deep underground. The first chamber was vast and circular, its walls lined with mirrors. As Lyra stepped inside, her reflection warped and shifted, showing her in various stages of life: a carefree child, a dutiful princess, and a future version of herself, wearing a dark crown. One reflection spoke. "Why do you seek the crown, Lyra? For power or for redemption?" Lyra hesitated. "I seek to protect my people." The reflection's smile twisted. "Are you sure? Deep down you crave freedom, from your father, from duty, from yourself." Selene shouted from outside the chamber, but Lyra's voice wavered. "I do feel trapped, but that doesn't mean I'd harm my kingdom. I want to be a leader worthy of my people's trust." The mirrors shattered, and the door to the next trial opened. The second chamber was a labyrinth of shadow, where the air grew cold and the walls whispered Lyra's fears. The shadows took the form of her worst nightmares: her father's disappointed gaze, her people turning against her, and the throne engulfed in flames. Kael, wielding a torch, led the way. "Stick close, princess. Whatever this place shows you, it's not real." But when Kael's voice shifted into a cold, mocking tone, "You'll never be more than a pawn, Lyra," she realized even her allies could be illusions. Gritting her teeth, Lyra faced the shadows. "I will not let fear dictate my choices." Her voice echoed with resolve, and the shadows dissipated, revealing the final door. In the last chamber, Lyra found herself alone before a pedestal. The Whispering Crown rested upon it, its intricate design glowing faintly. A voice filled the chamber, soft yet commanding. "To claim me, you must give up what you hold most dear. What will you offer, princess?" Visions flooded her mind. Her throne, her people, her dreams of freedom. She thought of Selene and Kael waiting outside, and her father's faith in her. Tears welled in her eyes. "I would give my life if it meant saving my kingdom," she whispered. The crown pulsed with light, and the voice replied, "A noble answer, but actions will prove your worth." The chamber began to collapse, forcing Lyra to flee with the crown in hand. Emerging from the ruins, Lyra was ambushed by Lady Morgana and her shadow court. Kyle, to Lyra's shock, revealed himself to be working with Morgana. "It wasn't personal, Princess," Kyle said, his voice laced with regret. "I needed the gold and the crown." But Morgana had no intention of sharing the crown. With a wave of her hand, she immobilized Kyle and demanded Lyra surrender the relic. Celine stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You'll have to go through me first." Morgana sneered. A handmaiden protecting a fallen princess? How quaint. Just as Morgana reached for the crown, the griffin swooped down from the skies, scattering the shadow court. Kyle, breaking free of Morgana's spell, turned on his former allies, helping Lyra and Celine escape. The group retreated to the Whispering Woods, where they regrouped. Kyle, guilt-ridden, admitted his betrayal. "I've done terrible things, but I see now that the Shadow Court can't be trusted. Let me help you make this right." Though hesitant, Lyra accepted his aid. Together, they devised a plan to confront Morgana and destroy the crown. In the climactic battle at the forest's edge, Lyra faced Morgana one-on-one. The crown's whispers grew louder, tempting Lyra to wield its power to defeat Morgana. "Take it, child," Morgana hissed. "You've already proven you're just like me, hungry for power." Lyra resisted the temptation. Drawing strength from her companions, she used the wisdom of the trials to channel the crown's magic, not for destruction, but to purge its dark influence. With a blinding flash, the crown crumbled to dust, and Morgana's power was broken. The journey back to Eldoria was bittersweet. Lyra had destroyed the crown, but at great personal cost. The trials had changed her, revealing both her weaknesses and her inner strength. Kyle parted ways with the group, leaving behind a letter of thanks and a promise to redeem himself. Celine remained by Lyra's side as they returned to the palace, where King Alden embraced his daughter. "You've proven yourself far braver than I ever imagined," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In the months that followed, Lyra worked to unify the kingdom, drawing on the lessons she had learned. Though whispers of the crown's legacy lingered, Lyra knew that her destiny was her own to shape. Years later, as Queen Lyra ruled over a thriving Eldoria, she often visited the Whispering Woods. One day, she heard a faint whisper in the breeze. "The choice was yours, but the story is far from over." Lyra smiled, her heart steady. "Let it be," she murmured. "The kingdom stands, and that is enough." With the Whispering Crown destroyed, the kingdom's magic began to stabilize. For centuries, Eldoria had been subtly influenced by the crown's lingering curse. Crops failed unpredictably, border disputes escalated into unnecessary wars, and whispers of rebellion constantly threatened peace. Now, for the first time, the land felt quiet. But the Shadow Court was not entirely defeated. While Lady Morgana had disappeared after the battle, her lieutenants, figures cloaked in shadow, continued to sow unrest in the far corners of the kingdom. Rumors spread that Morgana was still alive, retreating to a hidden fortress to plot her return. Lyra, though hailed as a hero by her people, felt uneasy. The destruction of the crown had cost her something intangible, a piece of her soul, perhaps. She found herself haunted by dreams of the trials, of Morgana's voice, and of the fleeting, seductive power she had resisted. Kyle's departure from Lyra's side was not the end of his story. Feeling the weight of his betrayal, he sought redemption by infiltrating the remnants of the Shadow Court. The rogues and mercenaries he had once called allies now viewed him as a traitor, forcing him to operate in secrecy. Through his efforts, Kyle uncovered critical information. Morgana was searching for the shards of the Whispering Crown. Though the crown had been destroyed, its essence had fractured into 3 pieces, each containing a fragment of its power. If reassembled, the crown could be reborn, potentially stronger than before. Kyle sent a warning to Lyra, delivering it via a coded message smuggled into the palace. The message read, "The crown is not dead, Meet me where the moon kisses the sea. Lyra and Selene set out to rendezvous with Kale at the coastal cliffs of Moonlit Cove. Their journey was fraught with danger, as shadow court agents now hunted them openly. Along the way, they uncovered pieces of the crown's history. The first shard, hidden in a mountain monastery, guarded by monks who believed the shard to be a divine relic. Lyra convinced the monks to relinquish the shard, but not before facing an ancient guardian, a stone golem imbued with the shard's magic. The second shard, found deep beneath the ocean in the sunken ruins of an ancient temple. To retrieve it, Lyra and her companions had to navigate treacherous underwater caves and face a sea serpent bound to protect the shard. The third shard, the final piece, was said to be in Morgana's possession, hidden within her fortress of shadow. Kale guided Lyra and Selene to Morgana's stronghold, a towering black citadel surrounded by an enchanted wasteland. Along the way, Kale's character deepened, revealing his regrets and his reasons for turning to a life of crime. "I've never had something worth fighting for," he admitted to Lyra one night by the fire, "but seeing you stand against Morgana, against the crown's temptation, you've shown me what true strength looks like. I want to be better, for you and for Eldoria." Though Lyra was cautious, she began to see Kale as more than a rogue. Their growing bond added emotional stakes to the final leg of the journey. The final confrontation with Morgana was an epic siege. Lyra, Selene, Kale, and their allies, including the Griffin and a coalition of forest dwellers, stormed the Shadow Fortress. Morgana, now infused with the power of the third shard, wielded terrifying magic that threatened to overwhelm them. The shards had corrupted her, transforming her into a monstrous figure, half human and half shadow. During the battle, Lyra faced a moral dilemma. The shards, when united, could restore the crown, but Lyra could also destroy them permanently. However, using their power even briefly would mean risking her soul. Kale was gravely wounded in the fight, saving Lyra from one of Morgana's deadly spells. His sacrifice pushed Lyra to make her decision. She chose to wield the shards, channeling their magic to banish Morgana and her followers to the void. Though victorious, Lyra paid a steep price for using the shards. The magic left a mark on her, a visible scar running across her arm that glowed faintly in the dark. She could feel the shards' whispers even after their power had faded, warning her that the balance of magic in Eldoria was forever changed. Kale survived his injuries, but barely. As he recovered, he confessed his feelings for Lyra, but he also admitted that he didn't belong in the palace. "I'm a thief, princess. You deserve someone who can stand beside you without shame." Lyra, torn between duty and her heart, let him go, knowing their paths might one day cross again. On the 10th anniversary of her coronation, Lyra stood once more at the edge of the Whispering Woods. The wind carried a familiar sound, soft, haunting whispers that spoke not of the past, but of the future. As she turned to leave, a single phrase echoed in her mind. "The crown story is never truly over. Its legacy lives on in you." Lyra smiled, her heart steady. "Let it live as a memory then. The people deserve peace." The camera fades to black as Lyra walks away, her silhouette framed by the rising sun, a symbol of hope for generations to come. Our next story is about the cursed prince and the maid's redemption. In the golden age of Erindor, a kingdom of vast forests, rolling hills, and glimmering rivers, there lived a prince named Alaric. Beloved by his people, Alaric was kind, brave, and destined to rule. The kingdom rejoiced as his 21st birthday approached, for it marked the day he would be crowned king. Yet beyond the borders of Erindor, in the desolate wastelands of Virn, there dwelled a dark sorcerer named Malverick. Consumed by envy and spite, Malverick harbored a deep grudge against the royal family. Decades earlier, he had sought the hand of Queen Lenora, Alaric's mother, only to be rejected for his wicked ways. Her rejection festered into hatred, and he vowed vengeance. On the eve of Alaric's birthday, the prince walked alone in the moonlit gardens of the royal palace. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming roses. He clutched a golden locket bearing his mother's portrait, a token of her love and wisdom. Suddenly a shadow fell across the garden. Alaric turned to see a figure cloaked in darkness, his eyes glowing with malice. "Who dares disturb the peace of this night?" Alaric demanded, his voice steady, despite the unease creeping into his chest. "I am Malverick," the figure hissed, "and I have come to claim what should have been mine long ago." Before Alaric could draw his sword, Malverick raised his staff, uttering words in a language as old as time. A chilling wind swept through the garden, and Alaric's body began to change. His hands became hooves, his voice turned into a whinny, and his royal robes vanished, replaced by a simple saddle. "You shall remain a beast," Malverick sneered, "until a kiss born of true love breaks this curse. But who could love a mere horse?" With a cruel laugh, Malverick disappeared into the night, leaving the newly transformed Alaric alone in the garden. The palace guards, unrecognizing the majestic black stallion as their prince, led him away to be sold at the market. Weeks passed, and the once proud prince found himself in the stables of a wealthy merchant. Life as a horse was harsh. He was fed, brushed, and saddled, but there was no kindness in the hands that cared for him. Alaric often looked to the stars, yearning for freedom and the love that might one day save him. It was in this bleak existence that he met Liana. She was a maid in the merchant's household, a young woman with fiery auburn hair and a kind heart. Unlike her master, she treated the animals with compassion, often sneaking them extra food or whispering soothing words. One day, as Liana tended to the horses, she noticed the black stallion standing apart from the rest. His eyes, deep and intelligent, seemed to plead with her. She approached cautiously. "What's your name, boy?" she asked softly, though she knew he couldn't answer. "You look like you've seen better days." She decided to call him Midnight, a name that suited his sleek, dark coat. From that day on, she made it her mission to care for him. She brought him fresh apples, spoke to him as if he could understand, and even defended him from the stable hand's rough treatment. Unbeknownst to her, Midnight was no ordinary horse. Alaric began to trust her, responding to her kindness with small gestures, a nuzzle here, a protective stance there. One evening, as Liana sat in the stable, she spoke of her dreams. "I wish I could leave this place," she confided. "There's a whole world out there, but I'm just a maid. What could I possibly do?" Alaric wanted to tell her she was worth more than she believed, but he could only listen, his heart aching with unspoken words. Back in Erindor, the kingdom suffered. King Theodoric, devastated by his son's disappearance, fell under the influence of Malverick, who posed as a trusted advisor. The sorcerer spread lies, claiming Alaric had fled in fear of responsibility. With the people's trust waning, Malverick began implementing harsh laws, draining the kingdom's resources to fuel his dark magic. In the shadows, a band of loyalists led by Sir Cedric, Alaric's childhood friend, worked to uncover the truth. They learned of Malverick's deception and sought a way to find the missing prince. Meanwhile, Liana made a startling discovery. While cleaning the merchant's study, she found a book of ancient spells. One page detailed a curse that transformed humans into animals, and the description matched Midnight's strange behavior. "Could it be?" she whispered, her heart pounding. That night, she returned to the stable and looked into Midnight's eyes. "If you are more than what you seem," she said, "I promise I'll help you." Midnight stomped his hoof, a gesture of affirmation that left her breathless. Malverick, sensing that his curse was in danger of being broken, sent his minions, shadowy creatures born of his dark magic, to eliminate Liana and Midnight. One night, as Liana and Midnight fled the merchant's estate, they were ambushed. Lyanna fought valiantly, using a torch to drive the creatures away. Midnight reared up, kicking and trampling the shadows until the two escaped into the forest. There, they encountered Sir Cedric and his loyalists. Recognizing Midnight's unusual intelligence, Cedric pieced together the truth. "The prince lives," he declared, "and we will restore him to his rightful place." Guided by an ancient map, the group journeyed to the Enchanted Spring, a place said to amplify true love's magic. Along the way, they faced numerous trials, including a treacherous river and a labyrinth of illusions. As they reached the spring, Malverick appeared, his dark power emanating like a storm. "You will not undo my work," he roared, summoning a vortex of shadows. Cedric and the Loyalists fought bravely, holding off Malverick's forces. Lyanna, clutching Midnight's reins, led him to the spring. "Alaric," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "if you can hear me, know that you're not alone. I believe in you." She kissed his forehead, and a blinding light erupted from the spring. Midnight transformed, his body elongating, hooves becoming hands, until Prince Alaric stood before her. Empowered by the spring's magic, Alaric confronted Malverick. With a single strike of his sword, imbued with the love and courage of his companions, he destroyed the sorcerer. Alaric returned to Erendor, where he was crowned king. Lyanna stood by his side, no longer a mere maid, but a hero in her own right. Their love, born of trust and sacrifice, united the kingdom. The story ends with their wedding, a celebration of hope, love, and redemption. The kingdom, once shrouded in darkness, now thrived under their rule. Though peace returned to Erendor, the scars left by Malverick's tyranny lingered. The kingdom's coffers were nearly empty, the people were wary of leadership, and pockets of dissent began to emerge. Alaric, though a wise and compassionate ruler, found himself facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. Lyanna, now queen, was not immediately accepted by the court. The nobles whispered about her commoner roots, questioning her place beside the king. She bore their skepticism with grace, but deep down she felt the sting of their rejection. One night, as they sat together in the royal garden, Alaric noticed her sadness. "They doubt you because they don't know your strength," he said, taking her hand. "But I know it, Lyanna. Without you, I'd still be a beast." "And without you," she replied, "I'd still be a maid dreaming of a better life. Together we'll show them what we can achieve." Their bond grew stronger, but a new darkness loomed just beyond the horizon. Unknown to Alaric and Lyanna, Malverick's death had not erased his influence entirely. In the desolate wastelands of Vern, a hidden artifact, the Obsidian Heart, still pulsed with the remnants of his dark magic. The artifact called out to those hungry for power, and it was found by a former general of Malverick's army, Lady Ravessa. Ravessa, a cunning and ruthless warrior, had once been loyal to Malverick, but now sought to claim his legacy for herself. Using the Obsidian Heart, she gained control over shadows and began amassing an army to conquer Erendor. As her power grew, strange occurrences began to plague the kingdom. Crops withered overnight, livestock disappeared, and rumors of shadowy figures prowling the forests spread like wildfire. One fateful night, Ravessa's forces attacked a border village, leaving it in ruins. Survivors fled to the capital, begging for protection. Alaric called an emergency council meeting. "These attacks are no accident," Cedric said, now the captain of the Royal Guard. "This is the work of someone wielding dark magic." "I thought we destroyed all of Malverick's power," Alaric said, his brow furrowed. "Not all," said an unexpected voice. The council turned to see an old woman in tattered robes standing in the doorway. She introduced herself as Solara, a seer who had once served in the royal court. "Malverick's death left a void, and now it has been filled," Solara explained. "The Obsidian Heart is in the hands of Lady Ravessa. If left unchecked, she will plunge the world into eternal darkness." Solara revealed that the only way to destroy the artifact was to forge a weapon from the Sunstone, a legendary gem hidden deep within the Sunspire Mountains. Determined to protect his kingdom, Alaric set out on a perilous journey to find the Sunstone. Lyanna insisted on accompanying him despite his initial protests. "You are my strength, Alaric," she said. "Where you go, I go." Cedric, Solara, and a small group of trusted warriors joined them. Together they braved treacherous landscapes, icy peaks, raging rivers, and labyrinthine caves filled with ancient traps. In the heart of the Sunspire Mountains, they encountered Solarin, the guardian of the Sunstone. Solarin, a radiant dragon of golden scales, tested their courage, wisdom, and unity. "You seek the power to destroy darkness," Solarin said, his voice echoing like thunder. "But power alone is not enough. Show me your heart, and I shall judge your worth." Through their trials, Alaric and Lyanna demonstrated their love, selflessness, and determination to protect their people. Moved by their sincerity, Solarin gifted them the Sunstone and warned them of the price of using its power. Upon their return, they found Erendor under siege. Revessa's army of shadows had reached the capital, and the city was on the brink of collapse. Using the Sunstone, Alaric forged the Blade of Dawn, a weapon capable of piercing the Obsidian Heart's defenses. In the final battle, Alaric and Lyanna led their forces against Revessa. The fight was brutal, with shadow creatures overwhelming the kingdom's defenders. Cedric faced off against Revessa's top lieutenants, while Lyanna used her cunning to outmaneuver the enemy and rally the people. Alaric confronted Revessa atop the castle walls. She wielded the Obsidian Heart's dark energy, but the Blade of Dawn shone like the sun, dispelling the shadows around them. "You cannot win, boy," Revessa snarled. "Darkness is eternal." "Not while there is light," Alaric replied. With a final strike, he shattered the Obsidian Heart, releasing a blinding light that banished the shadows and destroyed Revessa. The victory came at a cost. The use of the Sunstone drained much of Alaric's strength, leaving him weakened but alive. The kingdom, though battered, rallied together to rebuild. The nobles, once skeptical of Lyanna, now saw her courage and wisdom. She became a symbol of hope, earning the love and respect of the people. Solara returned to her role as the royal seer, guiding Alaric and Lyanna as they worked to restore prosperity. Years later, Alaric and Lyanna's reign became known as the Age of Light. Their love story was told across generations, a testament to the power of unity and resilience. In their twilight years, they often walked through the royal gardens, hand in hand, under the same moonlit sky where their journey began. "The shadows will always return," Lyanna said one evening. "Then we will always be the light," Alaric replied, his eyes shining with love. The tale ends not with an end, but with a promise that as long as courage and love endure, no darkness can ever truly prevail. Before we move on to the next tale, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you. Our next tale is about the forgotten princess of Glindara. The Oracle of Moonspire foretold the birth of a child destined to unite Glindara. The one born under the crescent moon shall bring light to the darkest hour. When Princess Amara was born, the kingdom celebrated, but in the shadows, Morgathia plotted. Infiltrating the castle with the aid of her shadow magic, she kidnapped the infant. She cursed the kingdom with famine, unrest, and division until Amara's return, or her end. 16 years later, Lyanna lived a quiet life in the village of Eldenwood. Raised by Elira, a skilled herbalist, she assisted in healing the sick and gathering herbs in the Whispering Woods. Though loved by the villagers, Lyanna felt like she didn't belong. Strange dreams of a castle and a golden-haired woman plagued her. On her 16th birthday, an elder in the village gifted her a medallion with a crescent moon design, saying, "This symbol has always been part of you, though you may not yet understand its meaning." That night, the woods seemed alive with whispers. Shadowy figures lurked just beyond the trees. Meanwhile, Sir Kale set out on his mission. After years of fruitless searching, he was the royal family's last hope of finding Princess Amara. The oracle's latest vision pointed to Eldenwood. At the edge of the forest, the crescent moon's light will shine again. Kyle arrived during a storm. In the marketplace, he saw Liana helping an elderly woman. Her crescent birthmark caught his eye. Kyle approached her cautiously. "I've traveled far searching for someone who may be like you. Do you ever wonder where you come from?" Liana hesitated. "I've wondered all my life, but the answers don't exist." Gale asked to meet her guardian, Elira, who reluctantly revealed the locket she had found with Liana as a baby. Inside were portraits of the king and queen. That evening, shadow beasts attacked the village, sent by Morgathia to eliminate Liana. During the chaos, Kyle and Liana fought side by side. To everyone's astonishment, Liana instinctively wielded an ancient blade they found among Elira's relics. Elira knew it was time for Liana to leave. Tearfully, she gave her a pouch of herbs and whispered, "You were meant for greater things than this village, my dear. Go and find who you truly are." Liana reluctantly agreed to journey with Kyle to Glindara's capital, seeking the truth about her identity. The journey to the capital was long and perilous. Kyle shared stories of the royal family, painting a vivid picture of Glindara's splendor and sorrow. One night, while camping in the woods, Liana dreamt of a grand hall adorned with banners of the crescent moon. In her dream, a voice whispered, "The light is within you, my child. Trust it." Kale noticed her growing unease. "What's troubling you?" he asked. "Everything," Liana admitted. "If I am who you say I am, why was I left behind?" "You weren't left behind," Kyle replied gently. "You were taken, and now it's time to take back what's yours." The whispering woods proved dangerous. Morgathia sent illusions to mislead them. At one point, Liana found herself separated from Kale, drawn into a clearing where the trees whispered her name. There, she encountered a spectral guardian, a spirit from Glindara's ancient past. The guardian tested her courage, challenging her to confront her fears. "You doubt yourself, child of the crescent moon," it said. "Only by embracing who you are can you claim your destiny." Liana passed the test, gaining a fragment of her lost memories, her mother's voice singing to her as an infant. After weeks of travel, they reached Glindara's capital. The castle loomed high, its towers glowing faintly under the crescent moon. Liana's heart raced as they approached the throne room. Queen Seraphina gasped when she saw Liana. "Amara," she whispered, rushing to embrace her daughter. Liana felt overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can be who you want me to be." "You already are," the queen assured her. "You've survived what none of us could endure." Liana's return wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The court mage Eldrin began training her to harness her royal magic. Her powers were tied to the elements of Glindara, the winds of the highlands, the waters of the Silver Lake, the fires of Mount Umbra, and the earth of the Moonspire. Kyle trained her in combat, teaching her to wield the ancient blade she had found. Their bond deepened, though both were hesitant to admit their feelings. "You're strong," Kyle told her during a sparring session. "Stronger than you know." "And what if I fail?" Liana asked. "Then we'll fail together, but I don't think you will." Morgathia, furious at Liana's return, launched a siege on the capital. She used her dark magic to raise an army of shadow creatures, plunging the city into chaos. Liana took charge, rallying the knights and soldiers. "We fight not just for Glindara, but for every life that darkness seeks to destroy." In the midst of the battle, Liana confronted one of Morgathia's lieutenants, a monstrous shadow beast. Using her blade and newfound powers, she defeated it, inspiring the people of Glindara to fight back. The climax of the conflict led Liana and her allies to the Moonspire Temple, the source of Morgathia's power. There, the sorceress awaited, her magic amplified by the temple's ancient energies. "You think you can defeat me?" Morgathia sneered. "You're just a frightened child." Liana stood tall. "I am the light Glindara has waited for, and you are nothing but a shadow." The battle was fierce, with Lyanna using everything she had learned. Drawing upon the temple's power, she unleashed a beam of light that shattered Morgathia's magic, banishing her forever. With Morgathia gone, the kingdom began to heal. Lyanna embraced her role as princess, traveling to the far corners of Glyndara to unite its people. Chaol remained by her side, and their friendship blossomed into something deeper. Together, they worked to ensure Glyndara's future. One night, as Lyanna gazed at the crescent moon from the castle balcony, Chaol joined her. "Do you ever wonder what's next?" he asked. "Always," she replied, smiling. "But whatever it is, I know I'm ready." Our next tale is about the lonely prince. In the sprawling kingdom of Aridorn, nestled between snow-capped mountains and shimmering emerald forests, stood the grand castle of Eldralis. Its spires reached toward the heavens, and its walls were adorned with murals of past rulers, each painted in regal splendor. The people of Aridorn thrived under the rule of King Renwyn and Queen Elira, who were both loved for their wisdom and benevolence. Yet within the golden halls of Eldralis, a secret sadness lingered. Prince Draidan, the sole heir to the throne, was a dwarf. He was born not in the expected mold of a tall and commanding ruler, but rather with a stature that set him apart from his towering parents. His hair was the color of burnished copper, and his green eyes gleamed with intelligence and kindness. But as the years passed, whispers filled the court, and even the kindest smiles carried undertones of pity. Draidan had grown accustomed to the sideways glances and muted conversations that ceased when he entered a room. Yet these things did not embitter him. He was loved by his parents and adored by those closest to him. The court scholars praised his sharp mind, and the knights marveled at his strategic brilliance. Still, a void ached within him, a longing for companionship, for someone who saw not the prince nor the dwarf, but simply Draidan. Draidan's childhood was one of contrasts. As a boy, he was taught the ways of diplomacy, swordsmanship, and the rich history of Aridorn. But outside the walls of the castle, he faced a world that struggled to understand him. During one of his earliest public appearances at a festival, a group of children his age had teased him, calling him the Little Lord. Though he masked his hurt, the memory of their laughter lingered long after the festival ended. From that day, Draidan withdrew from many public events. He immersed himself in books, spending countless hours in the castle's vast library, where stories of great heroes and magical realms became his solace. His favorite tales were those of unlikely heroes, figures who overcame impossible odds and proved that true strength lay within. His parents, though loving, struggled to ease his pain. King Renwyn, a towering figure with a voice like thunder, often took Draidan on hunting trips to bond. Yet even in the forest, where they were far from the court's prying eyes, Renwyn could sense his son's melancholy. "Strength is not measured by height, my son," the king often said. "It is measured by the weight one can carry, not just on one's back, but in one's heart." Queen Elira, a gentle soul with silver hair that shimmered like moonlight, doted on Draidan in her own way. She ensured he received the best tutors and frequently reminded him of his intelligence and kindness. Yet despite their efforts, Draidan could not shake the loneliness that gnawed at him. As Draidan reached his 21st year, he was officially introduced to the Council of Elders, a group of advisors who helped govern the kingdom. Though Draidan's sharp mind quickly earned their respect, he could not ignore their subtle skepticism. Would such a prince ever inspire loyalty among the people? Could he lead armies into battle, negotiate with foreign rulers, and secure Aridorn's legacy? The pressure mounted as suitors and noble families began presenting their daughters at court, hoping for a royal match. Draidan, however, found no joy in these introductions. Many of the women, though polite, seemed more interested in the crown than in the man who wore it. One evening, unable to sleep, Draidan wandered to the castle's highest tower, The night was unusually clear, and the sky was blanketed with stars. The moon cast a silver glow over the land, and for a moment the world felt quiet and peaceful. As he gazed at the stars, a sense of longing overwhelmed him. "Is there someone out there," he whispered to the night, "who can see me for who I truly am?" Little did he know his words would not go unanswered. Far away, in the heart of the whispering woods, a faint glow began to stir. Unseen by the prince, a gentle wind carried his words through the forest, awakening something ancient and magical. Days passed after Drayden's quiet plea to the stars, yet the feeling of longing persisted. He threw himself into his royal duties, hoping to distract himself. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the grand windows of the castle's council chamber, Drayden joined King Renwyn and Queen Elira for an important meeting. Among the attendees was Eldrin, the royal seer. Eldrin was an enigmatic figure, his long silver beard and robes adorned with intricate symbols of the arcane. Despite his age, his sharp blue eyes carried a piercing clarity that unnerved even the most confident courtiers. The meeting began with discussions of trade agreements and reports of a bountiful harvest, but Eldrin remained silent, his gaze fixed on Drayden. When the council adjourned, he approached the prince, his staff tapping lightly on the marble floor. "Your Highness," Eldrin began, his voice low and deliberate, "the stars have spoken of your destiny." Drayden raised an eyebrow. Intrigued but skeptical, Eldrin's prophecies, though revered, were often cryptic and open to interpretation. "And what do the stars say of me, Eldrin?" Drayden asked. The seer leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the very air might steal his words. "The heavens have whispered of a bond, a love unlike any other. You will find your true heart beneath a sky of endless stars, where roses bloom in the moonlight." The word sent a shiver down Drayden's spine. Though he had little faith in fate, something about Eldrin's tone made him believe this prophecy was more than idle superstition. "But where is such a place?" Drayden asked, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. Eldrin smiled faintly. "The whispering woods hold many secrets, my prince. Trust the stars to guide your steps." Drayden could not shake Eldrin's words. That night, he studied maps of Aridorn, his finger tracing the edges of the Whispering Woods, a sprawling forest that bordered the kingdom. The woods were known for their strange happenings, disappearing travelers, ghostly whispers, and an eternal mist that seemed to hide its depths. The thought of venturing into the forest both thrilled and terrified him, yet something deep within urged him forward. By morning, he had made his decision. "I'll ride to the Whispering Woods," Drayden announced at breakfast. Queen Elira nearly dropped her teacup. "The Whispering Woods. Have you taken leave of your senses, Drayden? That place is dangerous." "Perhaps," Drayden admitted, "but I can't ignore the prophecy. If there's even a chance it holds meaning, I must see it through." King Renwyn studied his son in silence for a moment, then nodded. "If you believe this is your path, I will not stand in your way. But you won't go alone. Take Sir Keldon and a few guards for protection." Drayden shook his head. "No, this is something I must do on my own." Though reluctant, his parents finally agreed, and preparations were made. By dusk, Drayden set out on his horse, a sturdy black steed named Onyx. He carried only the essentials: food, water, a sword, and his favorite book of legends. The journey to the woods took 2 days. On the first night, Drayden camped beneath a canopy of stars. The air was cool, and the distant howls of wolves reminded him of stories he had read about lone travelers meeting their fate in the wild. Yet he felt no fear. If the prophecy was true, then his journey had purpose. On the second day, he reached the edge of the Whispering Woods. The trees stood like sentinels, their twisted branches forming an archway that seemed to beckon and warn in equal measure. A faint mist clung to the ground, swirling like ghostly tendrils around Onyx's hooves. As Drayden entered the woods, the air grew colder and the light dimmed. The sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by the rustling of unseen creatures and the occasional whisper, as if the forest itself was alive. Hours passed, and the path became less distinct. Just as doubt began to creep into Dredan's mind, he noticed a faint glow in the distance. He dismounted and tied Onyx to a tree, proceeding on foot. The glow led him to a clearing unlike anything he had ever seen. In the center of the clearing was a garden filled with roses that shimmered like starlight, their petals glowing faintly silver under the moon's light. The air was filled with the soft hum of magic, and Dredan felt an unexplainable sense of peace. Kneeling among the roses was a young woman, her long chestnut hair cascading over her shoulders. She wore a simple dress, but there was an air of grace about her that caught Dredan's attention. The woman looked up, startled by his approach. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I am Dredan," he replied, unsure how much of the truth to reveal. "And you?" "Liana," she said, rising to her feet. Her brown eyes studied him carefully. "You're far from home, stranger. What brings you here?" Dredan hesitated before replying. "I've come seeking something. Perhaps it's here, or perhaps I've been foolish." Liana smiled faintly. "If you found this place, then perhaps you're not so foolish. Few stumble upon the starlit garden without purpose." Intrigued, Dredan asked, "What is this place?" Liana knelt again, tending to the roses. "It's a sanctuary," she said simply, "a place of healing and hope. These roses have grown here for generations, cared for by my family. They are said to hold magic for those who seek it." Dredan felt a flicker of hope. Then maybe I was meant to find this place. Liana glanced at him again, her expression softening. "Perhaps you were." As Dredan stood in the soft glow of the starlit garden, his heart raced with a mixture of wonder and confusion. The roses that surrounded him seemed to hum with energy, their petals shimmering in the moonlight like fragments of the very stars above. The air was thick with magic, and it felt as though the garden itself was alive, aware of his presence. Liana continued tending to the roses, her hands gentle as she pruned a particularly large bloom. Despite the enchantment of the scene, there was something grounded about her, something real. Dredan found himself drawn not only to the magic of the garden, but also to the quiet strength and grace she exuded. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Dredan said, unsure of how to break the silence. Liana paused and looked up at him, her brown eyes searching his face with quiet intensity. "You haven't disturbed me. This garden welcomes all who seek it." She stood up and dusted off her hands. "But it's rare for someone to find this place, especially someone like you." Dredan furrowed his brow. "Someone like me?" Liana nodded, glancing down at the ground. "The garden chooses who it reveals itself to. Only those with a pure heart or an unfulfilled destiny seem to stumble upon it." She smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "Perhaps you've been seeking something for a long time." Dredan shifted uneasily. "I have," he confessed. "I've always felt different, like I was meant for something greater. But I don't know what. My parents love me, but they don't understand. The people of my kingdom see my size and dismiss me before they even know my heart." Liana studied him quietly, as though weighing his words. Finally she spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "The world often judges what it doesn't understand, but that doesn't mean your worth is any less." Her words struck Dredan with an unexpected force. In that moment, he realized that for the first time, someone truly saw him, not as a prince, not as a dwarf, but as a person. He felt a warmth spread through him, a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. I don't even know how to thank you," Dredan murmured. "No one has ever said anything like that to me." Liana smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me. It's just the truth." She paused, looking around the garden and then back at him. "But I've sensed something else. This garden, it doesn't just choose people based on their hearts. It also reveals what they truly seek. And I believe you've come here for more than just answers. You've come because you're searching for something, someone, Drayden's breath caught in his throat. He had been trying to deny it for so long, his loneliness, his yearning for someone to truly understand him. He had buried it under layers of duty and royal responsibilities, but deep down, he knew she was right. Before he could respond, Lyanna's eyes softened and she stepped back. "You don't have to answer now. The garden will reveal its secrets in time." The days that followed seemed to pass in a blur of quiet companionship. Drayden and Lyanna spent much of their time together in the starlit garden, where the roses bloomed brighter with each passing night. Their bond grew stronger, deeper, as they shared stories of their lives. Drayden of his royal duties, Lyanna of the history of her family and the garden. Despite the magic of the place, there was a simplicity to their connection that felt grounding, as though the very earth beneath their feet had conspired to bring them together. But even in the most perfect of moments, the shadows of doubt and uncertainty loomed. Drayden knew his journey was far from over. Though he had found a kindred spirit in Lyanna, the path ahead was clouded with challenges he could not yet understand. And as much as he wanted to stay in the safety of the garden, part of him knew he couldn't hide there forever. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Drayden stood at the edge of the garden, his mind heavy with questions. "You seem distant tonight," Lyanna said softly, stepping up beside him. Her voice was filled with concern, and her hand brushed gently against his. Drayden sighed. "I can't help but think of what's to come. I found something here, someone, but I know my duty to the kingdom calls me back. I can't stay in the garden forever, and yet I don't know how to balance the two." Lyanna looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "You've always been torn between your heart and your duty, haven't you?" Drayden nodded. "It feels as though the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and no matter where I turn, I'm expected to carry it alone." Lyanna's expression softened. "You're not alone, Drayden. Not anymore." He turned to face her, his green eyes searching her face for any hint of hesitation. But there was none. There was only sincerity in her gaze. "I want to be with you, Lyanna," he said, his voice earnest. "But there's so much at stake. The kingdom needs me. My parents are depending on me to lead. I can't abandon them, not even for you." A small, sad smile tugged at Lyanna's lips. "You don't have to abandon anyone, Drayden, but you will have to choose. True love always comes with a price, a choice that must be made no matter how difficult." Her words lingered in the air, hanging like a heavy mist. Drayden had always known that duty and love could never coexist without sacrifice, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel all the more real. His heart ached at the thought of leaving Lyanna behind, but the weight of his responsibilities as prince could not be ignored. The next morning, as Drayden and Lyanna walked through the garden, a dark figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. A messenger, dressed in the colors of Aridorn's military, rode swiftly toward them. His face was grim, and his eyes were filled with urgency. "Your Highness," the messenger said, dismounting and bowing low. "There has been word from the northern borders. The kingdom of Thalion has raised its armies, and rumors suggest they are preparing for war. King Renwyn requests your presence immediately." Drayden felt a chill run through him. This was the moment he had feared, the call to duty that would pull him away from Lyanna and the peace he had found in the starlit garden. He glanced at Lyanna, who stood beside him, her face filled with concern, but also quiet resolve. "I must go," Drayden said, his voice low. "The kingdom is in danger. I cannot ignore the call to protect it." Lyanna nodded, her expression softening but not without sadness. "I know, but remember, Drayden, that a prince's heart is not bound by a crown alone. Your decisions shape not only the fate of your kingdom, but your own. Choose wisely." Drayden turned back to the messenger, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. "Prepare my horse. I will ride at once." Lyanna watched him as he mounted Onyx, her eyes filled with an unspoken plea. And for a fleeting moment, Drayden felt torn between the woman he had come to love and the kingdom he had sworn to protect. The journey to the northern borders was swift, but Drayden could not shake the weight of his choice. As they neared the military camp, the sounds of preparation, horses neighing, soldiers shouting orders, the clatter of weapons filled the air. The sight of the camp brought a sense of duty back to him, but it did little to quell the growing knot in his stomach. His father, King Renwyn, awaited him in the command tent. The king looked even more formidable in the midst of war, his broad shoulders hunched over a map of the northern region, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Drayden, my son," King Renwyn said, his voice deep and commanding. "We are facing a potential invasion. Thalion's forces are vast, and their king is unpredictable. We must prepare for battle. Your experience in strategy will be invaluable." Drayden nodded, his mind shifting back into the role he had been groomed for all his life. "What is the current situation?" "We have scouts in the field, but the terrain is treacherous. The enemy could strike at any time," Renwyn replied. "I need you to lead the defense, organize the troops, and ensure our forces are ready for what comes." Drayden felt the weight of his father's expectations settle onto his shoulders. The responsibility was immense, but it was what he had been trained for. However, as he turned to leave the command tent, a sense of doubt gripped him once more. The path ahead was unclear, and every decision seemed to pull him further from the woman he loved. Yet, as the first sounds of the army mobilizing reached his ears, Drayden realized there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of strategy and preparation. Drayden found himself at the forefront of the defense, commanding troops, studying enemy movements, and coordinating with generals. The tension in the air was palpable, and though the soldiers followed his orders with unwavering loyalty, Drayden could feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him more with each passing hour. That night, as he sat in his tent, reviewing battle plans, he felt a familiar presence enter. It was Sir Keldon, one of his most trusted knights. "Your Highness," Sir Keldon began, bowing respectfully, "there's word from the starlit garden." Drayden's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "The message comes from Lyanna," Keldon said, lowering his voice. "She wishes to speak with you before the battle begins." The words were like a lifeline in the midst of the storm. Drayden's heart ached to see her, to hear her voice once more. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. War was coming, and his kingdom needed him. Still, a part of him longed for her. He could almost hear her words, reminding him of his true heart. With a sigh, Drayden stood up, his decision weighing heavily upon him. "Prepare my horse, I will ride to the garden." As the camp stirred with the preparations for war, Drayden's heart felt heavy. The cold night air bit at his skin as he saddled Onyx, the powerful stallion that had always been his companion in battle. But this ride felt different. It wasn't a ride toward the battlefield. It was a ride toward a decision that had been brewing inside him for days. The sounds of soldiers preparing for the impending conflict faded into the distance as Drayden made his way through the darkened woods toward the starlit garden. Each step of the journey felt like it was pulling him further from his duties and deeper, into his own heart, into the woman he had come to love. His mind raced with doubts. Was it cowardice to seek solace in her presence at a time like this? Was he abandoning his kingdom by wanting to be with her when his people needed him most? The questions were relentless, each one pressing harder than the last. As he approached the clearing where the starlit garden lay hidden, a sense of peace settled over him. The garden, with its glowing roses and the soft hum of magic, had always been a sanctuary. Here he could think clearly, unburdened by the expectations of his crown or the looming threat of war. And then, there she was. Lyanna stood at the center of the garden, her back to him, her hands gently tracing the petals of a glowing rose. The sight of her bathed in the soft light of the moon took his breath away. There was no denying the pull between them, no matter how heavy the weight of his responsibilities. She turned at the sound of his approach, a soft smile blooming on her lips as she saw him. "Drayden," she whispered, her voice like a melody in the quiet of the night. His heart swelled at the sight of her, and for a moment, he forgot about everything else, the kingdom, the war, the impossible choices that lay before him. "Lyanna," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. He stepped toward her, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. "I've missed you." Lyanna's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "I know you've had much on your mind, Drayden. The world you carry on your shoulders. I can feel it in your every step." She paused, searching his face as though she could see the turmoil that raged within him. "But you must know that you cannot carry it alone." Drayden's chest tightened. "I don't know how to choose. I feel torn between my duty to the kingdom and my heart. If I stay, I risk everything I've worked for, my crown, my legacy. But if I leave, I abandon the very people who need me." Lyanna stepped closer, her eyes steady. "What if the answer lies somewhere in between? What if your true strength lies not in choosing one over the other, but in finding a way to reconcile both?" Drayden shook his head, unable to see how it could be possible. "The kingdom is on the brink of war. The people need a leader. I can't abandon them." "I'm not asking you to abandon anyone," Lyanna said, her voice calm yet firm. "I'm asking you to remember who you are. The prince, yes, but also the man who has a heart full of love. You can lead, Drayden, but you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to sacrifice your happiness for the crown." Her words resonated deeply within him, but doubt still lingered in his mind. "How do I balance them? How can I give my heart to both the kingdom and to you?" Lyanna smiled softly, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "One does not have to choose between love and duty. But to lead with love, you must first understand that you are not alone. If you are meant to rule, you will do so with compassion. If you are meant to be with me, I will walk by your side, no matter what comes." The weight in Drayden's chest seemed to ease, if only slightly. He could see the sincerity in Lyanna's eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn him to her in the first place. But even as he stood there, torn between his duty and his love, he knew that the journey ahead would not be simple. As they stood there in the glow of the roses, the air thick with magic, something changed. Drayden could feel it, an energy rippling through the garden, as though the very earth itself was responding to their conversation. The roses around them glowed brighter, their petals shimmering in hues that Drayden had never seen before. Lyanna looked up at the sky, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "There's something more," she whispered almost to herself. "I sense a change in the air, a shift." Before Drayden could ask what she meant, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The roses seemed to sway as if caught in an unseen wind, and the stars above flickered, casting strange shadows over the garden. "Lyanna, what's happening?" Drayden asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "The garden is reacting to something that has been set in motion," she said, her voice filled with an urgency that Drayden had never heard before. "The magic here is ancient, and it has always known what must happen. You are connected to this place, Drayden, but your path is not just about you. It is about the kingdom, and it is about me." Drayden's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" Lyanna took his hand in hers, her grip tight with determination. "The prophecy of the roses speaks of two fates intertwined, a prince destined to lead but torn by love, and a woman chosen not just for her heart but for the role she will play in his destiny. Together you will either unite the kingdoms or watch them fall into ruin. The choice is yours, but it will not be easy." The weight of her words hit Drayden like a blow to the chest. He had suspected there was more to his connection with Lyanna, but this revelation was beyond anything he could have imagined. His life, his kingdom, and his heart were bound by forces he could not control. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. Lyanna's eyes met his, her expression both gentle and sorrowful. "You must choose, Drayden. Choose not just for the kingdom, but for yourself. And no matter what happens, remember that you are not alone. I will be with you, by your side, no matter the cost." The roses around them began to glow brighter still, their light casting a soft, ethereal glow over the garden. Drayden stood still, taking in her words, the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him. It felt as though the very stars above were watching, waiting for him to make his choice. As Drayden turned to leave the garden, the pull of both his heart and his duty seemed more pronounced than ever before. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The war loomed ever closer, and the kingdom needed him. But Lyanna was the first person who had ever made him feel truly understood, truly seen. He knew that he could not walk away from his responsibility, not entirely, but he also knew that he could not deny the love he felt for her. And as the tension of the days ahead weighed heavily on his shoulders, Drayden realized that the path he would walk would not be easy, but it was his to choose. With one final glance at Lyanna, he made his decision. He would fight for his kingdom, for his people, but he would also fight for the woman he loved, and together they would face whatever trials awaited them, no matter the cost. Drayden rode back to the encampment with a renewed sense of purpose. The prophecy revealed by Lyanna had given him clarity, but it also weighed heavily on his mind. He knew now that his path was not one of singular devotion to the kingdom or to love, but one of balance. The choices ahead would not only define his legacy as a leader, but also shape the future of Aridorn and his place beside Lyanna. The camp was alive with activity when he arrived. Soldiers moved with urgency, sharpening weapons, preparing armor, and tending to the horses. The air was thick with the scent of oil and steel, and the sounds of war echoed through the camp. King Renwyn awaited Drayden in the command tent, surrounded by advisors and maps of the northern region. His expression was stern, his eyes shadowed by the weight of impending battle. "You've returned," Renwyn said, his deep voice filled with relief and authority. "I trust you've found your resolve, my son." Drayden nodded, stepping forward with confidence. "I have. The battle ahead is not just a test of our might, but a test of our unity. We cannot falter, Father, but I must ask for your trust. I may need to act in ways that seem unconventional." Renwyn studied him for a moment, his piercing gaze searching for any hint of uncertainty. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Do what you must, Drayden. Just ensure we prevail." The following days were consumed by preparations. Drayden threw himself into the work, organizing defenses and refining strategies. He relied on the expertise of his generals, but also trusted his instincts, which had been sharpened by years of training and leadership. Yet as focused as he was, his thoughts often drifted to Lyanna. Her words echoed in his mind, and the memory of the garden's glowing roses filled him with both hope and determination. He had promised her that he would find a way to balance his duty and his love, and he intended to keep that promise. It was during one such moment of reflection that Sir Keldon approached him. The knight's face was grim, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Your Highness, there's been a development," Keldon said. Drayden straightened, his attention sharpening. "What is it?" "Our scouts report that Thalion's forces are larger than anticipated. They've allied with mercenaries from the eastern plains, nearly doubling their numbers. They'll reach the border within 2 days." The news was troubling, but Drayden refused to let fear show on his face. Double their numbers, perhaps, but not their unity. Mercenaries fight for coin, not for loyalty. We can use that to our advantage. Keldon hesitated. "There's more. The enemy seems to be aware of our positions. It's possible we have a traitor in our midst." The words sent a chill through Drayden. The thought of betrayal within his own ranks was a dagger to his heart, but he pushed the emotion aside. There was no time for doubt. "We'll address the traitor later," he said firmly. "For now, we focus on the battle. We must outthink them, Keldon. Alert the generals. I have a plan." That evening, Drayden called a council of his most trusted commanders. Around a massive wooden table in the command tent, they studied maps of the region, marking key positions and choke points. "The Thalian forces are vast," Drayden began, his voice steady and commanding. "But they are also overconfident. They believe their numbers will guarantee victory. We will show them otherwise." He pointed to a narrow pass near the border, flanked by steep cliffs. "This is where we'll make our stand. The terrain will force them into a bottleneck, neutralizing their advantage in numbers. Archers will line the cliffs, and our cavalry will hold the rear to prevent any flanking maneuvers." The generals nodded in agreement, though some looked skeptical. "But what if they anticipate this?" one of them asked. "If they have a traitor feeding them information, they may avoid the pass entirely." Drayden's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's why we'll feed the traitor false information. We'll leak details of a supposed ambush in the eastern forest, drawing their forces away from the pass. By the time they realize the truth, it will be too late." The room fell silent as the commanders processed his plan. Finally, King Renwyn spoke. "It's risky," he said, his tone cautious. "But it's also brilliant. If it works, we'll cripple their forces and turn the tide of this war." Drayden nodded, his resolve unwavering. "It will work. We must trust in our people and in each other." As the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Drayden found himself restless. The weight of the coming battle bore down on him, but it was not fear that kept him awake. It was the prophecy, the sense that this battle was only the beginning of something far greater. He walked to the edge of the camp, where the forest loomed dark and silent. There, beneath the canopy of stars, he closed his eyes and let the cool night air wash over him. "Drayden." The voice startled him, but he recognized it immediately. Turning, he saw Lyanna standing in the shadows, her cloak blending into the darkness. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "It's dangerous." "I couldn't stay in the garden while you face this alone," she said, stepping closer. "I had to see you to remind you that you're not just fighting for the kingdom, you're fighting for us." Drayden's chest tightened at her words. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "Lyanna, you've given me strength I didn't know I had. But this battle, it's not just about me. It's about every life in Aridorn. I can't afford to falter." She smiled, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "You won't falter, Drayden. You were born for this. But remember, the prophecy doesn't speak of one man's victory. It speaks of unity. You can't do this alone." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had always felt the weight of leadership as a solitary burden, but now he understood that strength came from those who stood beside him. "Then stand with me," he said, his voice steady. "When this is over, we'll face whatever comes together." Lyanna nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Always." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the army of Aridorn stood ready. Drayden rode at the front, his armor gleaming in the morning sun, his sword at his side. The pass loomed ahead, a natural fortress that would be their battleground. The sounds of Thalion's army echoed in the distance, thousands of soldiers marching, their banners fluttering in the wind. But Drayden felt no fear. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing the determination on the faces of his soldiers. And in the distance, hidden among the trees, he caught a glimpse of Lyanna. Her presence was a reminder of what he was fighting for, not just the kingdom, but the future they might share. With a deep breath, he raised his sword, his voice ringing out across the ranks. "For Aridorn, for the people we love, stand strong and we shall prevail." A thunderous cheer rose from the soldiers, and as the enemy drew closer, Drayden felt a surge of resolve. The storm was coming, but he was ready. The sun rose higher in the sky as Thalion's army appeared on the horizon. Their banners rippled in the wind, displaying a sea of red and black. The sound of their march was a thunderous drumbeat, a declaration of their strength and intent. Drayden sat astride Onyx at the front of his forces, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. Behind him, the soldiers of Aridorn stood ready, their ranks organized into tight formations. The cliffs of the starlit pass loomed to either side, creating a narrow battlefield where the numbers of the enemy would mean little. Above, archers were hidden among the rocky outcroppings, their bows trained on the choke point below. Dredan raised his hand, signaling silence among his men. The steady rhythm of the enemy's march grew louder, and with it came the rising tension of the moment.
"Hold," he called, his voice steady.
The soldiers shifted uneasily, their weapons gripped tightly. Dredan's plan relied on timing, on precision, and on trust. The false information about an ambush in the eastern forest had been fed to the suspected traitor. Now they had to wait and see if Thalion's forces would take the bait. As Thalion's army reached the entrance to the pass, their commander, a tall, imposing figure clad in dark armor, halted the column. From his position, Dredan could see the man gesturing to his lieutenants, likely debating whether to enter the narrow pass or divert to the forest. "Come on," Dredan muttered under his breath. Minutes stretched into eternity as the enemy deliberated. Finally, the commander barked an order, and the army began to move forward, filing into the pass. A ripple of relief swept through Dredan's forces, though they remained silent, waiting for his signal. "They've taken the bait," Sir Keldon murmured beside him. Dredan nodded, his gaze never leaving the enemy. "Prepare for Phase 1. As the bulk of Thalion's forces entered the pass, Dredan gave the signal. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the twang of bowstrings. From above, arrows rained down, striking the unsuspecting enemy soldiers. Chaos erupted as they scrambled for cover, their tight formation turning into a disorganized melee. "Archers, focus on the center," Dredan called. "Cavalry, prepare to charge." The archers continued their assault, targeting the heart of the enemy column. Meanwhile, the cavalry, hidden at the far end of the pass, readied their mounts. Thalion's forces attempted to retaliate, but the narrow terrain left them vulnerable. Their front lines surged forward, trying to break through Aridorn's defensive wall. Dredan rode along the ranks, rallying his men. "Hold the line! Don't let them break through!" The clash of steel and the cries of battle filled the air as the two armies collided. Dredan fought at the front, his sword flashing as he struck down enemy soldiers. Despite their numbers, Thalion's forces struggled to gain ground, their movements hindered by the terrain and the relentless assault from above. As the battle raged, a commotion broke out among the rear guard of Aridorn's forces. Shouts and the sound of clashing steel drew Dredan's attention. Turning, he saw a group of soldiers fighting among themselves. "Keldon, take command here," he ordered, spurring Onyx toward the disturbance. When he reached the rear, he found several of his men grappling with a soldier who had been caught trying to sabotage their supply wagons. "Traitor!" one of them shouted, slamming the man to the ground. Dredan dismounted, his eyes narrowing as he approached. The captured soldier was unmasked, revealing a face he recognized, one of his father's trusted aides. "Why?" Dredan demanded, his voice cold. The man sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "Thalion promised me riches beyond anything this kingdom could offer. I owed them nothing." Dredan's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "You've betrayed your people for gold." The traitor's defiance faltered under Dredan's gaze, and he looked away. "Secure him," Dredan ordered. "We'll deal with him after the battle." Returning to the front, Dredan found that the tide of battle was shifting. Thalion's forces, though battered, were beginning to regroup. Their commander had sent reinforcements to the front lines, pushing back against Aridorn's defenses. "Cavalry now!" Dredan shouted. At his command, the cavalry charged from their hidden position, sweeping into the rear of the enemy column. The sound of thundering hooves filled the pass as the mounted soldiers cut through the disorganized ranks, creating chaos among Thalion's forces. The enemy commander bellowed orders, trying to restore order, but it was too late. The combined pressure from the front and rear shattered their formation. Dredan saw his opportunity. He raised his sword, rallying his men. "Push forward, drive them back!" With a unified roar, the soldiers of Aridorn surged forward, their resolve unshakable. Dredan fought at their head, his every strike precise and powerful. The enemy began to retreat, their morale crumbling under the relentless assault. As the sun began to set, the battle drew to a close. Thalion's forces were in full retreat, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The pass was littered with the remnants of battle, broken weapons, fallen soldiers, and the banners of the defeated army. Draydan stood at the center of the battlefield, his armor battered, but his spirit unbroken. Around him, his soldiers cheered, their voices echoing through the cliffs. "We've won!" Keldon said, approaching with a tired but triumphant smile. Draydan nodded, though his expression remained solemn. The victory had come at a cost. Many of his men had fallen, and the kingdom's future was still uncertain. As he looked out over the battlefield, his thoughts turned to Lyanna and the prophecy that had brought them to this moment. The battle was over, but the journey was far from complete. In the distance, the first stars began to appear, their light a reminder of the promise he had made to his kingdom and to the woman he loved. The victory at the Starlit Pass was a hard-won triumph, but its aftermath was sobering. The soldiers of Aridorn worked through the night, tending to the wounded and gathering the dead. Fires were lit along the pass, their flickering light illuminating the grim reality of war. Draydan moved among his men, offering words of comfort and gratitude. Though weary, he remained steadfast, his presence a source of strength for the troops. Yet, in the quiet moments between conversations, his thoughts returned to the traitor they had captured and the implications of his betrayal. The next morning, as the sun rose over the battlefield, Draydan called for a council of his closest advisors. Sir Keldon, the other commanders, and a handful of trusted knights gathered in the command tent, their expressions somber. "Thalion's forces have been driven back," Draydan began, his voice steady. "But this war is far from over. We must determine our next move and address the matter of the traitor in our midst." The traitor was brought before the council, his hands bound and his face shadowed by exhaustion. He knelt before Draydan, his defiance from the previous day replaced by a wary unease. "You've betrayed your kingdom," Draydan said, his tone cold. "Your actions cost the lives of countless soldiers. Tell us what you know of Thalion's plans, and perhaps you'll earn a shred of mercy." The man hesitated, his gaze shifting between the faces of those present. Finally, he spoke. "Thalion's ambitions go beyond this war," he said, his voice low. "They seek more than conquest. They seek the power of the ancient relics hidden within Aridorn's borders. The battle at the pass was a distraction to weaken your forces, while their true objective lies elsewhere." A murmur ran through the council. Drayden's expression hardened. "What relics?" he demanded. "The crown of Erindor," the traitor replied. "An artifact said to grant its wielder dominion over the elements. Thalion believes it lies hidden in the ruins of Erindor, deep within the forest to the east. They've sent a smaller force to retrieve it while you're occupied here." Drayden's mind raced. The crown of Erindor was the stuff of legend, a powerful artifact that had been lost to history. If Thalion's forces obtained it, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. "Why tell us this now?" Sir Keldon asked, suspicion lacing his voice. The traitor's shoulders slumped. "Because I know Thalion's mercy is a lie. I hoped to profit from their promises, but now I see the price of betrayal. My life is forfeit, but perhaps I can spare others from the same fate." Drayden regarded the man with a mixture of contempt and pity. "Your words may have spared you immediate execution, but your fate is far from decided. Guards, take him away." With the traitor removed, Draydan turned to the council. "We cannot ignore this threat," he said. "If Thalion obtains the crown of Erindor, no army will be able to stand against them. We must intercept their forces and secure the artifact ourselves." "Do we have the numbers to divide our forces?" one of the generals asked. Draydan shook his head. "We'll leave a contingent here to secure the pass and tend to the wounded. I'll lead a smaller force to the ruins. Speed and precision will be our greatest advantage." The decision was met with nods of agreement. Sir Keldon stepped forward. "You'll need a trusted guard at your side. I'll accompany you." Drayden clasped his shoulder. "Your loyalty is always appreciated, Keldon." By midday, Draydan's chosen force was ready. 100 of his best soldiers, accompanied by scouts and a handful of mages skilled in healing and protective magic, set out for the ruins of Erendor. The journey would take them through dense forests and treacherous terrain, but the urgency of their mission drove them forward. As they rode, Dredan found himself riding alongside Lyanna, who had insisted on joining the expedition. "You don't have to do this," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "I do," she replied. "The crown is not just a weapon, it's a symbol of power and unity. If it falls into the wrong hands, everything we've fought for will be lost. I won't sit idle while the kingdom is in danger." Dredan couldn't argue with her logic. Her presence was both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. The forest of Erendor was a place of ancient magic, its towering trees and tangled undergrowth filled with an otherworldly energy. The deeper they ventured, the more the soldiers felt the weight of the forest's history pressing down on them. Scouts reported strange movements among the shadows, and the air grew thick with tension. Dredan kept his men on high alert, knowing that Thalion's forces were likely ahead of them. It was during one such moment of caution that the first attack came. A volley of arrows rained down from the trees, striking the ground and wounding several soldiers. "Ambush!" Keldon shouted, drawing his sword. Thalion's scouts emerged from the shadows, their dark armor blending with the forest. The two forces clashed, the sound of steel ringing through the air. Dredan fought with precision, cutting down enemies with calculated strikes. Beside him, Lyanna wielded a slender blade with surprising skill, her movements graceful and efficient. Though outnumbered, Dredan's forces held their ground, their training and discipline giving them the upper hand. As the last of Thalion's scouts fell, a tense silence settled over the forest. "Press on," Dredan ordered, his voice firm. "The ruins are close." As night fell, the expedition reached the ruins. The ancient structures, overgrown with moss and vines, stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time. In the center of the ruins stood a crumbling temple, its entrance guarded by carved stone sentinels. Dredan dismounted, his gaze fixed on the temple. "The crown is inside. We must move quickly." The soldiers spread out, securing the perimeter as Dredan, Lyanna, and a handful of others entered the temple. The air inside was cool and damp, the faint glow of magical runes illuminating the walls. At the center of the chamber, atop a pedestal, rested the crown of Erendor. Its surface shimmered with an ethereal light, and the air around it seemed to hum with power. Before Dredan could approach, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You're too late, Prince." From the shadows emerged Thalion's commander, flanked by a group of elite soldiers. His dark armor gleamed, and his eyes burned with cold determination. Dredan drew his sword, his stance unwavering. "This ends here." Thank you for watching Mr.VinzTales. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss my next adventure in bedtime stories. See you again on our next journey.